Got a handsome smirk if you're Captain Kirk. Whatever makes you feel like a
me. Phases on stunning.
yeah,
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
Whatever makes you feel.
It just never gets old for my friends at Critical Mass as we continue on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We've spent some time talking about some of the political dynamics of the media. We may get to a little bit of that with our last but not least guest here on the show. We've also spent some time talking about what to keep in mind as far as policy approaches to addressing the coronavirus crisis and after we get through the coronavirus crisis. But one important warning we all must heed, and I think it was very well stated in a new piece for Western Journal, is that we cannot allow ourselves to go along this path to socialism as we increasingly seem to be seeing in our country. Robby Starbuck is a film producer and director, and he joins us now, author of a brand new piece, just came out in the last couple of days, entitled COVID Crisis is a preview of what America would look like under socialism. And Robby Starbuck joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Robby, hello, sir, and welcome to the show. It's good to talk with you.
Hi, Jimmy. How are you doing? I got to say, I need a couple seconds still to process what I just watched with Captain Kirk.
We got you on a little too late. You needed to see the bit before that, Kirk, because there was my friends at Critical Mass, a bunch of audio bits we're able to use. And there's one where it's called Starship Winkler. And it's this series where it's this captain, it's all voice done, voice work. And it just so happens that Pricelocity or something like that, whatever they call it. Captain Kirk appears in there. Oh, Nathan's pulling it up if you want to watch it, but it is it's quite entertaining. And then we jump into that song. I thought I'd throw you for a loop.
Yeah, no, it was fun. It was fun. You know, we could dive right into the dark stuff. We can get into socialism. So yeah, no, I'm glad you liked the piece. It's something that, you know, I come from a Cuban family. And they experienced this in Cuba where everything was stolen from them. And it's obviously what they experienced is more extreme than what we're seeing in America. But the point of my piece was, you know, what we're seeing is a preview. This is a preview of what life would look like under, you know, socialist rule. If we had somebody like a Bernie Sanders or even somebody like Joe Biden, because Biden is not a moderate. That's one of the greatest lies you're going to see throughout this election cycle. Is that he's some kind of moderate savior. He's not. Joe Biden is not who he purported to be in the 70s or 80s or 90s. He is essentially a puppet at this point. You know, I mean, if you've seen the clips of him, you know that Biden has lost his way. He can barely remember what state he's in half the time. He's going to be controlled by the people he has around him. And the people he's surrounded himself with are people that are on the far left. So there's no avoiding the fact that, you know, that's where we're headed either way. Policy-wise, the policies that he's pushing are very similar to Bernie Sanders. So you look at this, and when you go to grocery stores and you see that you're limited in what you can buy, that's what people experience in Cuba, Venezuela on a regular basis. And that's what, you know, it's been mirrored back to me in a couple ways. One, as a warning for the future, you know, that this is a path that America could very well go down if young people don't sort of see the light in the errors within socialism. Or on the flip side, it also has made me very grateful to be an American because outside of this pandemic, the freedoms that we're blessed with is something that I can't take for granted given what my family experienced.
I think that's so important to keep in mind. And before we zero in on the socialism dynamic and the points of your piece a little bit more, Robby, I want to talk about Biden a bit more and play this clip. This is yesterday's live stream where Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden officially, which was just, it came as an absolute shocker to me, as I'm sure it did to you. And here is Bernie endorsing Joe Biden just yesterday.
So today I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe, and I'm speaking just for myself now, is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
You could hear Joe Biden go, oh, like he was shocked and surprised, Robby Starbuck, that he got this endorsement with Bernie right there on his own live stream.
I mean, that whole thing was a joke. To be honest, I wasn't shocked by it. You know, one thing that I think is clear to regular people is that there's an endorsement and then there's an endorsement. And what we saw yesterday was an endorsement. Like, it was like he couldn't have been poked and prodded into this much more than he was, you know? And if you followed sort of the reaction of Bernie's base was, they were not into this at all. They basically were like, hey, he's not our messiah, and we're not following Bernie into the fire here, okay? We get why he's doing it, but this is not for us. This does not reflect our values. And in their mind also, you know, the people that have been the loudest about the allegations that have been made against Joe Biden have been Bernie supporters. So he's put himself in an awkward position where he's not only going against his base, but he's actually going against his staff too, because, you know, like his press secretary came out yesterday saying that she's not endorsing Joe Biden. And, you know, they've been the loudest about the allegations that have been made by Biden's former staffer, who says that she was sexually assaulted by him. So it's a weird, there's a weird dynamic there. And it definitely was not a full-throated, you know, proud endorsement. I mean, Bernie was just, you know, within weeks has been running negative ads about Biden, and in a manner that it's not just, hey, these are our differences. They were attack ads, you know, so it's very difficult to take seriously. And I'd say what I noticed watching that live stream is it seemed a lot more like Bernie wanted to just start yelling at Biden at certain points and was just holding it in, where like Biden would start talking about how we need to treat incarcerated people better. And Bernie's sitting there like, you voted for the crime bill. You wrote part of the crime bill, you know? And those things, you could see the wheels turning, and Bernie was just trying to keep it together and pretend that he was endorsing this, but it did not go well. I don't think it went well at all.
Again, we're talking with film producer and director Robby Starbuck here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. To that point, I think the issue we're seeing, Robby, is one of an enthusiasm gap. I was struck by this Quinnipiac poll last week that showed 33% of voters 18 to 34 had a favorable view towards President Trump, but only 30% of voters 18 to 34 had a favorable view towards Joe Biden. And then you are seeing a lot of Bernie supporters who are like, no way we can support Biden. Yet even though you may have some Republicans and conservatives who are frustrated with some things by President Trump, there's not that same kind of enthusiasm gap, and therefore that could well be Joe Biden's undoing in November.
Yeah, if you've ever seen there's a hilarious video out there of this, like, she's like probably 18, 19-year-old girl, and she's like, please don't make me vote for Joe Biden. Please don't make me do it. It's hilarious. And that's basically reflects the sentiments of that generation. You know, they really don't like him. I would say, you know, we've got ourselves in a predicament where it's sort of almost like a rerun of 2016. It seems like all the same mistakes, except for somehow the candidate's even worse, you know? And that's what I think a lot of people are finding puzzling. And if you want to talk about enthusiasm gap, I can give you a really funny sort of anecdotal piece of evidence here. I have 5 times the amount of YouTube subscribers that Joe Biden has, okay? Joe Biden is one of 2 people that are in the running to be our president in a serious way, okay? And I have 5 times the amount of subscribers on YouTube that he has. That should be very worrying to Joe Biden's campaign, okay? That should be very worrying to them.
Again, Robby Starbuck joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let's go to your piece now, especially talking about young people and socialism and your clarion call and some of the thoughts I have and observations on youth and socialism. I want to read a passage from your piece in Western Journal. Americans are shocked by the fact that it has become difficult to obtain certain staples such as toilet paper. But for citizens living under socialist regimes, severe shortages are simply a fact of life. And they don't even have the option of settling for lasagna instead of spaghetti, because the shortages they endure day in and day out are far more widespread than anything Americans have encountered in recent weeks. Rationing is common in Cuba for this very reason. The government limits the amount of food and supplies each Cuban is allowed to buy and enforces those limits brutally. Robby, expand on that for us.
Well, yeah, I mean, to give you an example, you know, we still have one family member from our family. Well, we have family that's stuck in Cuba. So one of our family members, he's the oldest still, my living grandfather, he still goes every year to Cuba. And he loads up suitcases with everything he can, just basic medical necessities, things like Tylenol, women's hygiene products, you know, diapers, things that they can't get enough of. And he doesn't even bring a bunch of clothes for himself or anything. He brings the very bare minimum so that he can fit as much as he can of just pure essentials in there to bring to them, because they can't get them there. You know, and that's life. That's day-to-day life that I think people, it's easy to lose sight of when you live in a wonderful country like the United States of America, where you can get anything you want whenever you want on a regular basis, you know, and that's what this pandemic could sort of teach people in terms of lessons to pull from this, is that these experiences we're having are minor sort of hiccups compared to what people live in socialist countries.
Socialist utopias, as so many view it seems. Yeah. Here's my theory on young people, and we're close in age, Robby Starbuck, and I think this applies for kind of millennials who are early 30s, late 20s, as well as those who are Gen Z or the tail end of the millennial generation. I don't think that most millennials actually are socialist, even though polling data suggests that we are. And I think it's because there was the 2008 financial collapse, and we saw what happened then, and people were graduating with significant amounts of student loan debt. They didn't have very secure job prospects, and they blamed capitalism because they were told to blame capitalism. And then they looked out there and said, well, what's the alternative? If capitalism failed us, which it didn't, it was government policies, but if capitalism failed us, what's the alternative? Oh, it's this thing called socialism. They don't really understand what socialism actually is, yet at the same time, they love choice and opportunity and want things done quickly and well. And if they don't, they'll go on Yelp or Google and they will complain to high heaven, which means that millennials, Gen Z, we are not apt for a socialist society. What do you mean?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to sort of a misunderstanding of what socialism is. You know, I think that the idea of, oh, I want, you know, I mean, who wouldn't want all their debt paid off? You know, I mean, like, is there anybody who really is like, hey, I don't want my debt paid off? Sure. Anybody would want their debt paid off, but is it practical? You know, it's kind of like, I would like to eat ice cream all day, but is it practical for me to do that? No, it's not. So, you know, I think that that's sort of the disconnect here, is that we're seeing an idea versus a system, you know, and socialism as a system provides a very different reality than what they're thinking it provides. And some of that has been born of ignorance. You know, somebody like Bernie Sanders, he talks a lot about Scandinavian countries, he talks about Norway. I mean, there's so many things they leave out of this. Number one, Norway is not a socialist country. They say themselves that they are not a socialist country. They're a Nordic system. And the difference with a place like Norway is that they have what is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. That sovereign wealth fund pays for their social programs, which they do have large social programs, and it works strictly because they have that largest sovereign wealth fund that exists in the world, okay? And now what's in that wealth fund? Capitalist companies from the United States mostly, and fossil fuel companies. That's where they made all their money, okay, to do these social programs. That's not something you can replicate in the United States of America. So, you know, scale-wise, you're looking at very different things, and, you know, that's not, they say themselves, they're not socialists because they're not taking over industry, they're not doing any of those things. And so it's born of misunderstanding and ignorance from the politicians who they trust to tell them the truth. I think when we will see a real tide change is when in a future election, whether it's 2024 or 2028, when we see a candidate come forward who's conservative, a millennial, and is able to articulate the problems millennials face, but with solutions also articulated from a conservative point of view that tackle those issues. Because are there different issues that face millennials and Gen Z after them? Absolutely. But those issues, like, they need to be addressed in a way and with solutions that people in those generations can connect with.
Yes.
And those solutions, they exist in a conservative way. But so far, the people that have spoken to them about solutions have been people on the very, very, very far left.
Right.
And I think that's where the disconnect is.
I so agree, and I think that this is central to one of my observations that I've been giving here in Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, a series of speeches on how to win over millennials and Generation Z. And one of the big points that I stress is that we need to be about proposition, not just opposition. You can't just say no to forgiveness of student loan debt, no to free college, the so-called free college, no to Medicare for all or Green New Deal. You need to have alternative solutions that say, yes, we may be conservative and oppose these ideas, but that doesn't mean we have our head in the sand and don't think that we should address these ideas. And that, I think, is one of the big problems and challenges for conservatives in terms of winning over young people, is if we're just seen as a movement that says no, 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 then they're going to be scratching their heads saying, well, then, okay, you say no, what's your alternative? Otherwise, I just want to go for the guys that have these ideas.
Yep. And we need to not be afraid of having the conversations and having debates about ideas, because that's where we end up with better ideas. You know, so for instance, if I said to you, I said, hey, you know what, maybe as a solution, we could look at trying a program where the federal government says, hey, you want to not have student loan debt? Well, we can place you in a public job, in a federal job, and we can forgive your student loan debt, but you're going to be training to go directly into this job as you come out of this, and you're agreeing to be a part of this for X amount of time. You know, like some sort of public agreement where the person's choosing of their own volition to do that in exchange for not having that debt after X amount of years. And the public is getting something back for that. See, those are things where you could talk about solutions that actually could have some sort of realistic outcome. But you know, if we don't have the conversations and argue the ideas and figure out ways to make them better, we're not going to have solutions to give to people to be able to try to sort of win their vote. And that's what we have to do at the end of the day. Eventually, I don't think I mean, we have to win their vote as much as we can in 2020, but I think it's going to be more and more important as we go into 2024, 2028. And to do that, we need to speak their language about the issues and the solutions.
We're talking with Robby Starbuck, co-host of Grow Up on YouTube. And Robby, why grow up? I think that's important as well to this discussion of socialism, this notion of you should grow up. Why do you use that in the title of your program?
Growth. It's all about growth, you know, and I think that one of the biggest problems we face is, you know, like I said, there's sort of a gap in understanding a lot of these issues. And that's why, you know, a lot of people were very confused why I would come out and talk about politics, because professionally it was not an intelligent thing to do. But I didn't do it for professional reasons. I did it for personal reasons. I'm a dad, and I want my kids to be able to look back and know that their dad fought for what he believed in. He didn't hide at home and talk about his views at home and teach them, and, you know, in public have a very different view and cozy up to people who were helping make socialism happen. I wanted them to know that I fought for what I believed in. So the whole mindset of this show is to sort of calibrate people towards a growth mindset, so that they're taking in as much intelligent information as they can and making good decisions, you know, as a result of that. So it's about exposing people to good ideas, bad ideas, and allowing that sort of debate to happen and allow people to decide, you know, on the other side what makes the most sense in their life.
I don't think you can have, if you are a socialist, a personal growth mindset like what you're talking about, because you have too much of an idea in your mind that government should be there to provide all sorts of things. And the biggest problem with that mindset is government should be there is, first of all, it stunts your personal growth, but also what it does is it results in limited freedoms. As you know full well, and you talk about this in your piece, socialist societies limit human freedom in order to provide different services, and then, by the way, when those services are provided, they're often woefully inadequate.
Yep. And, you know, I would say, you know, woefully inadequate doesn't cover it entirely. You know, it's beyond that. It's the abuse that goes along with it too, you know, because if it was just woefully inadequate and, you know, there's not a good process for getting it fixed, you know, that's one thing. But in places like Cuba, Venezuela, I mean, if you just voice your opinion about it the wrong way, you could end up shot or thrown in prison. So that's the reality of it. And it doesn't take much to get there. That's what people miss, is they think that it like takes this gigantic, crazy event to end up there. It really doesn't. It's something that, you know, it's a slow slide into it. And by the time people realize that their rights are eroding, to the degree that they need to do something about it, it's too late to do anything about it, because the power structure at that point's already been flipped to such a degree that you could cause some chaos, but you're not going to change what's going on. And so that's why we have to be very careful about not letting that slide begin in the first place.
There's a couple final questions for you, Robby Starbuck. One, to your point, please tell us of the story. I found this to be one of the most powerful components of your piece for Western Journal, about when your mom's cousin was dying of cancer in Cuba and what that experience was like just for them to be able to feed her cousin.
Yeah, so, well, beyond that, there's actually stuff that's not in the piece about that story, because that was already such a lengthy word count about her story. And one of the things I would want to actually touch on that I found really poignant, but it's such a long thing to explain, it was hard to put into words, was that when she died, they didn't have a process to get her to a morgue or to a crematorium or to get embalmed or anything. There were no options. So they literally had to hire a taxi and put her dead body in a taxi and take her and find a funeral home on their own to take her to. And they had to make a deal with the funeral home under the table. The state didn't provide for it or any of that, even though it's a socialist country. And they had to basically, in payments, take care of this. But they had to literally put her dead body in a taxi to get her over there. But beyond that, just in terms of pure medical supplies, one of the things that's so frustrating to me whenever there's a medical crisis, and I've actually heard it during this coronavirus thing, is people talk about Cuba's health system. And anybody who talks about their system in a positive way has never been there, has never been outside of Havana, has never seen how people are treated in this system. Right. She had cancer and was unable to get basic medical necessities throughout the entire process. She was misdiagnosed multiple times. They didn't even find the cancer until it was at the point that she was not able to survive it. And feeding tube wise, the family had to come up with this all themselves. They had to make everything and just to get her to eat, because they couldn't provide this at the hospital. So, the differences that you see are they're so stark. And so when I hear people complain about the US system, is our system perfect? Absolutely not. There's a lot that needs to be changed, because part of the beauty of America is we always fight to be better. And we need to continue that. But in the spirit of being better, we need to make sure we don't make mistakes that make us worse. And that's where the stuff that, like Medicare for All can lead us to, is a situation where we end up in this slide towards a reality like what you see in Cuba, or like what they have in Venezuela, where a pregnant woman right now, I just read this great piece. This is probably the only time you'll ever catch me saying this. It was in the New York Times.
Whoa.
I said it's the best piece of journalism they've done in a decade. And they sent a reporter down to Venezuela with pregnant women and documented their experiences. And they went with them when their water broke. And they had to go to 6 different hospitals to even get let into a maternity ward. And when they did, the guard there wouldn't let them in until the mom passed out. The pregnant woman passed out on the ground outside, and the guard finally let her in. The baby died, and this all happened in front of a New York Times reporter. And that wasn't the only story they tracked. They tracked multiple pregnant women, and every single one had these terrible outcomes. And so that's the reality of where these systems go. And to give you an idea, if anybody thinks that's an exaggeration in terms of these systems, this is how quickly they erode. Only about 6 years ago, Bernie Sanders was saying that Venezuela, you were more likely to be able to capture and acquire the American dream in Venezuela than you were in America. Okay? That's where we were in very recent history. And now we find ourselves at a point in time where that's how quickly Venezuela's eroded, to a point where their basic rights are gone. People are eating rats in the streets now. There's no meat in grocery stores. And, women have to pass out outside of a hospital to be able to just be let in to give birth to a baby.
Final question for you, and that is I'm impressed that the New York Times actually did that story, Robby Starbuck.
I was too. That's why I said something too, because I want to encourage good journalism.
Yeah.
So I hit the media all the time. And when they get it right, in that rare instance, I want to give them some praise, because I hope they do more real journalism like that.
I think that's well put. And just a final question on the flip side. Yesterday, we saw quite a rambunctious Q&A between President Trump and members of the media, and some of it was just I thought, pretty absurd on the part of the media, but also they cut out, like MSNBC cut out of the press conference midway after the president put forward this montage that didn't look so flattering for the media. What is your perspective on how the media handles political coverage?
They think people are stupid. It's very simple. They think people are stupid. That's why they cover it the way they do. What other reason are they cutting out of these things? They know that these press conferences have been good for Trump. So they cut out of them because they're hoping people are so dumb they won't go looking for the rest of it, because they know that these are effective. And yesterday what you're seeing is, I mean, honestly, China, their communist ruling party, the CCP, they've got to be so happy right now. They watch these press conferences, and I swear to you, if they train these reporters themselves, they could not have a better outcome in terms of what serves their purposes for propaganda than what they're getting in these press briefings. These people have acted so shamefully. Our media, I said, it's an embarrassment. Honestly, at this point, they're a national crisis, and they may need to be quarantined in some sense, because this has gotten out of control. We're seeing today Bloomberg is caught. They were hiding a story about the Chinese ruling party and how they evaporated wealth from the working people, because this is what happens in communism and socialism. And Bloomberg trashed the story, fired a reporter, and tried to silence his wife because they didn't want China to be mad at them, because they didn't want to lose the money in China. So these entanglements that these news companies have with Chinese interests is something that is affecting the news we're getting in press briefings. The basic rule I've had with them has been, does your question help better inform people about this crisis? The vast majority of them do not. Most of these questions are framed strictly to increase the public profile and attention that the reporter's going to get. So, it's funny because they're the first people to criticize Trump for being a reality star before he became president. That's exactly what our journalists are now. Journalists. They're reality stars. They go on these press briefings because they want to make a name for themselves. And that's what it's turned into, is a big reality show where they're all competing for who can look like the bigger jerk and get the most amount of coverage afterwards.
We saw that with Paula Reed, especially yesterday, even accusing Dr. Anthony Fauci of being put up to this clarification that he made on a question, a hypothetical question on Sunday. And she was like, is this voluntary? His response was just gold, and we played it.
Which, by the way, Paula's husband went to school in China, in college.
Interesting to be sure. Robby Starbuck.
There's all these Chinese ties to all these places, and nobody questions them. There's very serious conflicts of interest that need to be looked at within a lot of these reporters. I mean, I thought it was great. Trump called out one of the reporters the other day and said, who do you work for? And they claim to work for an independent news company. They're working for a news company that is owned by China. So people need to question, where these questions are coming from in a lot of cases.
I think we could go for a long time and just keep talking Robby Starbuck. Really enjoyed our conversation. Check out his web show, Grow Up Live, as well as, of course, other works. Film producer and director, and the piece in the Western Journal I thought was just great. So, Robby, let's have you back. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You have a great day, too.
You as well. Robby Starbuck joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. What?